All of them. U.S. Marine Rescues. Dogs from auction and finds a hidden Wanmehao secret. The wind snapped off Flathead Lake and curled around the wooden pavilion like it was searching for something to carry away. Under the bleachers, hay dust floated in slow circles, catching the morning light as if even the particles were holding their breath. Luke Granger hadn't planned to stop here. His truck was half-packed with lumber, a busted fishing rod sat in the back seat, and his only real goal had been to refill coffee and forget the last few years had ever happened. But something about the painted sign, County Livestock and Farm Auction, 1 day only, had pulled his foot off the gas like gravity. He stood now in the shadow of a rafter, worn field jacket zipped up to the neck, boots muddy from the river's edge. 37. Rangy from old habits, heavier than he used to be, quieter than most men his age. His hands were in his pockets, his jaw was set, and his eyes hadn't left the dog since the cage rolled into view. The German Shepherd wasn't moving. Not the way dogs usually do in a crowd, ears twitching, tail uncertain. No, this one stood absolutely still, weight distributed low and even, like a soldier waiting for orders. His ribs showed through a patchy coat that had once been rich sable. One flank bore a burn mark shaped like a warped star. But none of that was what made the crowd shift in their seats. It was the eyes. Amber, almost gold. Not scared, not broken. Alert, focused on Luke. The auctioneer's chant rolled through the cold air like a rattling train, numbers bouncing off plywood and denim jackets. Someone laughed behind Luke. A man in a stained vest elbowed his buddy. Look at that one. Looks like he saw God and didn't like what he saw. Another voice. That one's cooked. You'd get more use out of a garden hose. Luke barely heard them. The shepherd hadn't blinked. Not once. His body didn't shake, his legs didn't give. He just stood, half emaciated, half defiant, staring directly at Luke like he'd waited years for this exact moment. Then the second cage rolled out. A Doberman, young but battered. Her right ear was torn into a crescent, and her belly was swollen with pups. She shifted as the cage bumped against the stage, pressing against the bars, eyes flicking to the shepherd and back. Not frightened. Protective. Behind her, a Rottweiler the size of a small boulder leaned against the cage door like he meant to stop the world from pushing any closer. Retired security animals, the auctioneer declared. Lot of 3, sold together, minimal paperwork, handling experience preferred. Luke's boots shifted on the boards. He didn't move consciously. His feet just stepped forward like muscle memory pulling him through fog. Starting at 200 for the set. Someone snorted. For that sack of bones? 250. A man with a badge-shaped belt buckle waved a hand, clearly showing off for someone. 3, came from the back. Luke's heartbeat didn't change, but his breathing did. Slower, controlled. 350. 400. Another voice barked, louder than necessary. The shepherd still hadn't moved. His ears had twitched once when the Doberman flinched at a burst of laughter. But his gaze hadn't left Luke's face. Luke remembered a pair of eyes like that. Years ago. Outside Helmand. A military dog named Ranger had found him under rubble and shrapnel, dragged him 30 feet, while bullets chewed the dirt inches away. Ranger had bled out the next day, head on Luke's boot. This dog had the same silence. 550. Someone added. The Rottweiler adjusted himself again, using his bulk to press into the Doberman, as if absorbing the weight of the noise for her. 6. Luke swallowed, the dryness in his throat turning to iron. 650. Then, like a key turning in a lock, the shepherd took one slow step forward inside the cage. Just one. Enough. 750. Luke's voice cut through the air. 800. It wasn't shouted, But it landed. The auctioneer paused. "We got 8 on the table. Do I hear 9? 9 came from a man Luke didn't recognize. Slick hair, shiny boots, eyes like dead coins. Luke's fists curled. 9.50. 10. The slick man fired back. 11. Luke again. No hesitation. The bleachers stirred. People leaned forward. Whispers crawled. The shepherd stood taller. The Rottweiler shifted his weight. The Doberman licked the inside of her paw and stared forward with strange calm. 1,300. Came from the slick man again, irritated now. 1,500. Luke said. 18. 2,000. The slick man turned, finally trying to see who kept answering. When he saw Luke, boots dusty, jaw set, eyes unwavering, he didn't bid again. The auctioneer looked surprised. "Well now, $2,000 going once." A long silence. Going twice. Luke's eyes never left the shepherd. "Sold." The gavel cracked wood. Luke breathed out like it hurt. Someone in the crowd scoffed. $2,000 for leftovers. You're a damn fool." Luke turned, looked at the man, then at the shepherd, then said, just loud enough to carry, "All of them. Now." The shepherd blinked. Just once. The Doberman exhaled. The Rottweiler lay down inside the cage like he finally didn't have to hold the world up anymore. Luke stepped forward, hands at his sides, breath steady, mind loud. He didn't know why he did it. Not really. All he knew was... Those dogs weren't broken. They were waiting. Luke Granger didn't speak on the drive home. The road to Lakeview Hollow cut through pine-stained hills, patched with last month's frost, but his eyes never wandered. His old Chevy rumbled beneath him, suspension squealing under the weight of 3 heavy crates lashed to the bed. Inside them were silence, weight, and ghosts. Arrow, the German shepherd, lay motionless, as though conserving the last of something sacred. Nyla, the Doberman, shifted restlessly, belly round and trembling, the metal floor too cold for new life. Moose, the Rottweiler, sat wedged in tight quarters, eyes half closed, breathing heavy like he was apologizing for taking up too much space. The smell was thick, metal, old fear, sawdust, something sour beneath. Luke cracked the window. The air was sharp with pine and coming rain. He let it bite his face. When the gravel turned to dirt and the truck reached the sagging cabin at the edge of town, he killed the engine and just sat for a beat, gripping the wheel like it owed him an answer. He had no plan, no leashes, no beds, no experience handling a pregnant dog, a half-starved shepherd, or a mountain of muscle with deep sunk eyes. All he had was a name he barely used anymore, and a flicker behind his ribs that had been cold since Ranger died. Arrow was the first he let out. The shepherd stepped from the crate like a soldier stepping onto unfamiliar ground, light on his feet, scanning in arcs, head low but alert. He didn't bolt, didn't cower. He simply walked to the edge of the porch and sat, back straight, eyes still fixed on Luke like the auction never ended. Luke said nothing, just nodded once. Arrow blinked, slow and sure. Next was Nyla. Luke moved slower with her. When the crate door opened, she curled tighter, eyes wide, trembling not from fear, but from something deeper, doubt, like she'd seen too many hands, and none had been kind. Luke knelt, held out his palm, and waited. Nyla stared at him. The wind lifted her torn ear. Her breathing hitched. Then she inched forward, one paw, then another. When she reached him, she lowered her head and brushed his hand with her nose. Inside the cabin, Luke had lined a box with towels and wool sweaters. He hadn't known if it would be enough. But as Nyla stepped in and turned, curling her body protectively around the slow rhythm of unborn life, it felt like something more than guesswork. It felt like instinct. Then came Moose. Releasing Moose was like opening the cargo hold of an old train car. He didn't explode out, he unfolded, slow and deliberate. He took one step out of the crate, then paused, eyes sweeping the yard. No tail wag, no sound. He lumbered forward, made it 3 feet, then collapsed on the porch with a groan so heavy it silenced even the breeze. Luke exhaled for the first time since the auction. Inside the cabin, the wood stove coughed back to life. The house was a single room, once meant for fishing weekends, now barely standing. The floor sloped slightly near the sink. A cot rested in the corner. Blankets piled on it like camouflage. A coffee tin sat by the stove, dented. A photo frame lay face down on the shelf above. Luke didn't bother to pick it up. He tossed another log into the fire, then crouched beside Arrow, who still hadn't moved from the porch. "You got a unit name?" he murmured. Arrow turned his head, ears twitching. "Not talkative, that's fair." Luke looked at the scar on Arrow's flank. Old burn, ugly, a burst shape. Could have been from a branding iron or something worse. Ranger had one too. Flash of memory, sand, blood, a burning Humvee. Ranger dragging him through shattered glass, barking like the whole war owed him something. The feel of coarse fur under trembling fingers. The last heartbeat that didn't belong to Luke, fading beside his boot. Luke closed his eyes. "Damn it," he whispered. He felt movement and looked down. Arrow had shifted. Not closer, but towards the door, positioning himself between Luke and the open yard. Watching. Guarding. "Not yours to protect, buddy." Arrow didn't blink. Luke stood and went back inside. Moose was snoring already, belly rising slow, head resting on his paws like he hadn't slept in years. Neela had settled in, eyes half shut but still alert. Her body curled around the tightness of her unborns, like she didn't trust the warmth yet, but was willing to try. Luke poured water into 3 metal bowls and set them down, one by one. He didn't say anything. Words were thin currency here. What mattered were gestures, rhythm, presence. As he sat down near the stove, Arrow finally stepped inside. No noise, no hesitation. He didn't sniff or pace. He just laid down, eyes on the door, ears half back. Luke poured himself a splash of whiskey. It burned all the way down. "I wasn't supposed to stop today," he said to no one in particular. "Was going to head up to the reservoir, clear my head." Arrow didn't move. "I didn't need more weight." The shepherd blinked. Luke looked down into the glass. The silence stretched. "I had a dog," he said quietly. "Ranger. Pulled me out when everyone else was gone." He looked over. "Looked like you. Same fire. Same eyes. Died with his head on my boot." Arrow slowly lowered his head to his paws. Not in sleep. Not in surrender. Just listening. Luke's voice cracked. "You're not him, I know that. But I'd swear, there's something in you." A beat passed, and then, barely perceptible, Arrow's tail thudded once against the floor. Luke didn't say another word. Outside, wind rattled the eaves. Inside, 3 broken dogs began the slow work of healing. One heartbeat at a time. The bell above the clinic door gave a tired clang as Luke pushed it open with his shoulder. The smell inside was sharp, antiseptic, wet fur, and something that always reminded him of hospitals and endings. Arrow padded in beside him, leaner now, but walking steady. His ears twitched at every new sound, eyes tracking shadows like a tactician. Nyla followed behind, slower, her belly nearly grazing the tile floor. Moose lumbered last, head swinging lazily, the whole room tilting just a bit to make space for him. "Morning," came a voice from the back. Dr. Alyssa Tran stepped into the hallway, tying her hair into a quick knot. She wore navy scrubs and worn sneakers, one lace dragging. Vietnamese-American, mid-30s, compact but commanding. Her sleeves were rolled up, her eyes were sharp. "You're early," she said, not unkindly. Luke gave a short nod. "They're due for a full workup. Rabies, microchip scans, whatever else you need." Alyssa crouched automatically, letting Nyla sniff her palm. The Doberman didn't flinch. She leaned in instead, pressing her muzzle against Alyssa's forearm like a quiet plea. "Been a while since anyone came in with 3 strays and a poker face," Alyssa said as she stood. "But I'll bite. Let's start with the shepherd." Arrow didn't resist the leash. He walked beside Luke down the hallway to the exam room. Clean white tile, stainless steel table. A technician waited by the sink, setting out gloves and alcohol pads. He was young, early 20s, sleeves pushed up to reveal faded ink on both forearms. His name tag read Tanner. Arrow froze in the doorway. Luke felt it. The dog's muscles went rigid under his hand, front paws locked just past the threshold. His breathing shifted. Deeper now, controlled. Not fear, focus. His ears pinned forward, eyes fixed on Tanner. "Easy," Luke murmured. Arrow didn't growl, didn't bare teeth. He stepped forward 1 slow inch, then another, nose lifted slightly as he sniffed the air. Then his head snapped toward Tanner's collar. In a blur, Arrow lunged. Luke caught him mid-stride, wrapping both arms around the dog's chest. The leash burned against his palm as Arrow pulled forward with a low, guttural sound, half warning, half command. The noise wasn't loud, but it was pointed. Tanner dropped the tray with a clatter. Syringes skittered across the floor. "Whoa, what the hell?" he stammered. Arrow's gaze never left his target. His body shook, not from rage but from restraint. "Arrow!" Luke barked. "That's enough." The dog stopped, just like that. Still trembling, he returned to Luke's side, tail stiff, chest rising and falling like an engine left running hot. Tanner backed up to the corner, face pale. "What's wrong with him? I didn't touch him." Alyssa stepped between them, her voice calm but cutting. "Go prep the Rottweiler, now." Tanner hesitated, then disappeared out the door, sneakers squeaking on tile. Luke dropped to a knee beside Arrow, hand firm on his back. "He's been good for days," he muttered. "What was that?" Alyssa didn't answer. She picked up the tray, gathered the scattered instruments, and only when her hands were full did she speak. "I got a letter this morning," she said. Luke looked up. "From who?" "County records. Someone's filed a claim on the dogs. Says they're company assets, auctioned improperly, possibly stolen." Luke stood slowly. "Who?" Alyssa opened a drawer, pulled out a folded envelope, and handed it to him. At the top was a logo. Venshaw, Tactical Solutions. Luke's jaw tightened. "He was there," he said flatly. "At the auction. Watched the whole thing, had paperwork. Didn't bid." Alyssa tapped the metal table with one finger. "Well, he's bidding now, in court." Arrow shifted beside them, his body still tense. His eyes tracked the door like he was waiting for something worse to walk through it. Luke read through the document twice, then a third time. "He's saying they were never decommissioned, that they were under contract, claimed as assets in liquidation." Alyssa nodded. "If the court sides with him, animal control can step in. Seize them, reassign or euthanize. No chance." Luke said, voice quiet but final. She studied him for a moment. "Do they have chips?" "Not sure. Auction didn't scan them." "I'll check," she said, already reaching for the scanner. Arrow stood tall as the wand passed over his shoulders. A sharp beep. Alyssa frowned. "Got something?" she said. "Older frequency, not civilian. Might be military batch." Luke didn't move. "Ranger had the same." Alyssa's head snapped up. "You said that name before." Luke ran a hand down Arrow's spine. "My K9 in Helmand pulled me from a roadside explosion, took 2 in the flank, still dragged me to the exfil point. Didn't make it." Alyssa leaned against the counter. "You think he's related?" Luke hesitated, then nodded. "Or trained by someone who worked his line. I don't know, but he looks at me the same way. Same discipline, same silence. Alyssa was quiet for a beat. Then she said, "I can run genetic markers. Not exact, but we might get a match to Ranger's registry. You still have the code." Luke reached into his wallet, pulled out a laminated card. Scuffed, worn at the edges. "Right there," he said. "Ranger 217 Kilo Romeo." Alyssa took it. Outside the room, Moose let out a low bark. Not urgent, just present. Luke looked down at Arrow, who had settled again, posture relaxed but alert. "You knew something about that tech," Luke said. "Didn't you?" Arrow didn't move. "He smelled like someone from your past? From Venshaw?" Still no movement, but his tail thudded once, slow and deliberate. Luke exhaled. "You're not just remembering. You're warning me." Alyssa stepped toward the door. "We'll know more in a few days." Luke reached for Arrow's leash. "We don't have a few days," he said. "We've already been found." And as they stepped back into the clinic hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, Luke's spine straightened just slightly. There was a battle forming. The ghosts were real. And Arrow wasn't barking at shadows. He was barking at the truth. The storm rolled in without rain, just a hard grey sky, pressing down on Lakeview Hollow. Luke had been stacking split wood along the cabin wall when the black SUV nosed up the drive, tires crunching the gravel like bones. Arrow was on the porch. Moose dozed under the window. Nyla lay in her box near the stove, her belly rising and falling with each strained breath. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, tall but narrow-shouldered, his coat too polished for the dirt road. His hair was combed in perfect lines, his tie a shade darker than the sky. Everything about him said city and control. He walked slowly toward the porch, papers tucked under one arm. "You must be Mr. Granger," he said, voice crisp. "I'm Carl Venshaw, Regional Director for Sentinel Security." He raised the envelope slightly. "Those 3 dogs you took from the auction belong to my company." Luke didn't answer right away. He wiped his hands on his jeans, set the axe down carefully, and stepped toward the porch. Arrow's head tracked the man's every movement, ears up, body tightening like a wire under tension. "They were sold at auction," Luke said. "I have the bill of sale." Carl smiled thinly. "Fraudulent. The employee who handled that liquidation exceeded his authority. Those animals are assets, Mr. Granger. Specialized, high-value assets. You've taken them unlawfully." Luke stepped onto the porch, closing the distance. "I didn't steal them. They're trained working dogs," Carl said. "Combat and detection. Dangerous without proper handlers. They're a liability here." Arrow rose from his sit. His hackles lifted. A low, rolling sound came from his chest. Not rage, not warning, but something deeper, like a drum under the floor. Carl stopped at the edge of the steps, one polished shoe on the bottom plank. "Call him off." Luke put a hand out automatically. "Arrow, stay!" But the shepherd didn't stay. He took a step forward, nose lifted, amber eyes locked on Carl's throat. His body angled between the man and the cabin door. Another low growl built under his ribs. Carl's smile twitched. "See, exactly my point. These dogs are unpredictable. Let me take them back before someone gets hurt." Luke's pulse spiked. He knew the look in Arrow's eyes. It wasn't aggression. It was recognition. Some scent in Carl's cologne or the leather of his gloves had struck a chord. Luke could feel the tremor running through the dog's muscles under his palm. "Arrow," Luke said, sharper now. "Sit." Arrow didn't move. Luke's voice hardened. "Stop it, Arrow!" The shepherd froze, head turning just enough for Luke to see his eyes. Disappointment flickered there, quick and unmistakable, before he lowered himself, paws slow against the boards. He didn't lie down. He didn't relax. He just waited. Carl stepped up another plank, emboldened. "You see? This is what happens when unqualified people interfere. Sign the release and I'll have them out of here before nightfall." Nyla shifted inside, a soft whimper escaping her. Moose rose from under the window, a deep sound echoing in his chest. The porch felt smaller with every breath. Alyssa appeared from the cabin doorway, wiping her hands on a towel. Her eyes flicked from Luke to Carl to Arrow. "What's going on?" "Company, man," Luke said. "Wants the dogs." "They're ours," Carl corrected smoothly. "Legally speaking." Alyssa's tone was even. "The DNA tests aren't back yet. Until they are, you can't prove ownership, and he can't prove theft. You both need to stand down." Luke turned to her. "You know who he is?" "I got the same letter you did," she said. "If he's telling the truth, those dogs were company property. If he's not, we need proof before this turns into a raid." Arrow's ears flicked back. He stared at Luke again, eyes steady but questioning, like he was waiting to see whose side Luke would stand on. Carl set the envelope on the porch rail. "You have 48 hours, Mr. Granger. After that, the county sheriff executes a court order. These dogs come with me, and if anything happens in the meantime, you're liable." He turned to go. Arrow rose slightly, a soft rumble starting again. Luke tightened his grip on the leash, pushing the dog back toward the doorway. "Enough," he muttered. "I said stop." Arrow sat, but his gaze never left Carl's back as the man walked to his SUV. When the engine faded down the drive, the silence left behind felt heavier than before. Alyssa leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. "You shouldn't have snapped at him," she said quietly. "I didn't snap," Luke said, but his voice betrayed him. He looked down at Arrow. The shepherd had lowered his head, eyes not on Luke now, but on the yard where Carl had stood. His tail lay flat against the boards. Luke crouched, reached out. "Hey." Arrow didn't move. Luke's hand hovered, then dropped. "I'm just trying to keep you safe," he said under his breath. Inside, Neela shifted in her box. Moose lay down again with a thud. Alyssa's face softened, but her voice stayed steady. "We'll wait for the results. Then we'll know who's lying." Luke straightened, eyes still on Arrow. "And if waiting's the wrong move?" Alyssa didn't answer. The wind pushed through the trees, rattling the eaves. Arrow stayed where he was, posture erect but eyes distant, like a soldier whose orders had just been questioned. The call came just after sunrise. Luke was outside, splitting wood again. Same swing, same rhythm, trying to beat the cold from his joints. Arrow lay nearby, paws crossed, watching the tree line like he expected something to come walking out of it. Not fear, just readiness. The phone buzzed once inside the cabin. Luke wiped his hands on his jeans and ducked in. Alyssa's name lit up the screen. "It's back," she said, skipping the greeting. "You need to come in. Now." By the time he got to the clinic, the sky had turned from steel to blue, and the sun was melting frost off the windows. Alyssa stood waiting by the front door, clipboard in, hand, glasses perched on her forehead, like she'd forgotten they were there. She didn't say a word until Luke stepped inside and shut the door behind him. "The shepherd, Arrow," she began, voice low. "He's not just a military dog." Luke stiffened. "I ran his sample through the old DoD MWD database, not expecting much. Those archives are spotty. But something hit. His mitochondrial markers match a 2005 line from the RER's breeding program. Same batch as Ranger." Luke didn't move. "You're saying—" "I'm saying Arrow isn't just any dog," she continued. "He's bloodline, direct, from the same damn family tree as Ranger. It's not 100%, but it's close enough to light every red flag in the system." Luke leaned back against the counter, breath catching. Ranger's line, still alive, still working. "He wasn't reacting to me by chance," Luke muttered. "No," Alyssa said. "He knew you the way blood knows blood. Muscle memory, something deeper. Luke looked down at his boots, jaw clenched. He'd buried Ranger in sand and silence. He thought that was the end of the story. But maybe the story had just waited for its next chapter. Alyssa flipped the page. That's not the only hit, she said. Moose has a chip, not standard issue, buried deep in the muscle near his spine. Took me 2 scans to find it. She handed Luke the printout. It's from a Black Ops training facility in Nevada. Program called FOG, Force-Oriented Guardians. Dogs trained for off-book missions. High risk, no paper trails. The facility burned down 5 years ago. Half the records were classified. But I pulled a few scraps from an archive terminal in D.C. with help from a friend. Luke skimmed the file. There was a picture, grainy but clear enough. Moose, younger, leaner, chained in a concrete kennel under harsh light. He was built to disappear, Alyssa said, but somehow he survived. Luke folded the page slowly. And Nyla. Alyssa hesitated. That one's harder to explain. He looked up. We had to assist the delivery, she said. One of the pups didn't make it, stillborn. But when Ellie was cleaning the birthing area, she found something wedged deep in Nyla's bedding, wrapped in medical gauze, dried blood, tucked into the straw like someone didn't want it discovered. She walked to the back room, returned holding a small evidence bag. Inside was a sealed Ziploc, and in that a crumpled black pouch. Thin, waterproof. On the outside a faded emblem, 3 arrows forming a circle. Luke opened the pouch with gloved fingers. Inside was a folded square of plastic no bigger than his thumb, a QR code printed on it. Barely visible. I scanned it using an offline reader, Alyssa said. It pinged a dormant Swiss account, encrypted chain trace, but I know enough to see a balance screen when I hit one. How much? Luke asked. She hesitated again. 976,000. Luke blinked. Dollars? He said slowly. U.S. currency, she confirmed. Held in a shell account owned by an offshore consulting firm. No withdrawal in over a year, but the account's password hash matched a known pattern used in illegal dog-fighting networks. Luke stared at the bag. You're telling me there's nearly $1 million hidden in a code, shoved under a pregnant dog, wrapped in bloody gauze? Alyssa nodded. Someone meant to move that pouch quietly. My guess, the dog was being used as a mule. Arrow stood beside Luke now, head tilted slightly, ears forward. Not tense, just listening. Why would anyone hide that much money? Luke asked. Because it was never about the dogs, Alyssa said. It was about what they were carrying, what they represented. Luke stared at the printout of Arrow's bloodline again, then at the chip data from Moose, then at the code. This was bigger than just one auction. Alyssa nodded. Way bigger. Arrow leaned forward slightly, pressing his head into Luke's thigh, just enough to ground him. Luke didn't flinch. Someone's going to come looking for this, he said. Not for the dogs, for what's inside them, what they know, what they carry. Alyssa agreed. That man, Carl, he's not backing off. Luke's hand dropped to Arrow's neck, fingers tightening in the fur. Then he better be ready, he said, because we're not backing off either. Moose let out a low rumble from the corner, half dream, half warning. Nyla, still recovering, blinked slowly under the clinic lights, her pups curled tight against her. Outside, the wind picked up. Inside, 3 dogs and 1 Marine stood at the center of a story that had just changed its shape. And someone, somewhere, had just lost $1 million secret. Luke never questioned Arrow again. Not after the bloodline report, not after the chip in Moose, and especially not after the QR code buried beneath Nyla's pups. Instinct, he realized, wasn't guesswork. It was memory buried in muscle, in scars, in generations of quiet survival. Arrow had seen things Luke hadn't, felt things that couldn't be measured. And now Luke followed him like a soldier trusts his fire team. The first trail came from the bank logs Alyssa decrypted. The offshore account connected to a shell company, Orion Security Holdings, based out of Belize, but rerouted through 2 known laundering hubs in Nevada and Pennsylvania. Shell inside a shell, Alyssa muttered, scrolling through code on her laptop at the kitchen table of the cabin. Classic cover for trafficking. Money in, dogs out. Ava, curled up on the floor with her laptop beside Moose's massive paws, chimed in. I found something too. There's a private online forum, invite only. Members post footage of extractions, like game clips. Some of the dogs have matching scars. Luke looked up from cleaning Moose's foreleg. You mean fighting videos? Yeah, she said softly. And one of them, I swear it's Nyla, a year ago, still got that tear in her ear. Arrow stood from the corner, walked slowly over, and stared at the screen. She clicked play. In the grainy footage, a thin Doberman limped across a ring, muzzle bloodied, but eyes fierce. When a shadow moved off-screen, she lunged, not in desperation, but defense. Arrow let out a single, low bark. Luke turned to Alyssa. Can you trace the poster? Alyssa narrowed her eyes. With time, but if we hit them too fast, they'll vanish. Then we flush them slow. Luke said, make them think we're amateurs. Meanwhile, we dig. Over the next 2 weeks, the cabin transformed from shelter to war room. Arrow started leading them in new ways. One morning, he stopped at the abandoned ranger station 2 miles from the property, sat stiff at the rusted cellar door. Luke pried it open with a crowbar and found boxes, dozens, filled with vests, collars, transport logs, all branded Venshore Tactical. Another night, Moose refused to leave the tree line near an old cannery by the lake. Luke followed him in and discovered a buried kennel with scorched edges and the faint smell of bleach and blood. This was a burn site. Alyssa confirmed. Someone scrubbed it hard, but not enough. Each clue made the picture clearer. Carl Venshore wasn't just claiming the dogs. He was running them, breeding, training, breaking, and moving them through layers of dummy contracts under security services. But it was Arrow who found the worst of it. In a rented storage unit south of town, they'd followed a paper trail linked to one of Venshore's shell companies. Luke cracked the padlock. Arrow darted inside, nose low. He paused near the back wall, tail stiff, then barked sharply and backed away. Luke knelt and pulled away the tarp. Underneath was a refrigeration unit. Inside were syringes, freeze-dried meat packs, and files. Alyssa flipped through the folders, her hands trembling. These aren't training records, she whispered. They're behavioral experiments. Photos of dogs in muzzles, wired with sensors, data sheets tracking fear responses, endurance under pain. One of the files was labeled M1R. The photo attached, a German shepherd with amber eyes. Younger, leaner, Arrow. They tested on him, Alyssa said. They tried to overwrite instinct with obedience. Failed. That's why they dumped him. Arrow looked away, ears folding slightly. Luke moved beside him, pressed a hand to his shoulder. They didn't break you. You made it out. That night, Ava edited a short video. Footage of Arrow walking across the ridge, backlit by moonlight. Moose rolling in the grass beside a toddler from the shelter. Nyla curled around her pups, gaze wary but calm. Over it, Ava layered text. They weren't discarded. They were built for war, and still chose mercy. It went viral, in under 12 hours. By morning, Ava's inbox was flooded. Whistleblowers, former handlers. One woman in Ohio who swore she trained Arrow in his first year remembered his stillness, his refusal to bite unless cornered. Another from Nevada said Moose was one of 6 dogs taken off the FOG program after a funding scandal. "They're not security animals," Alyssa said. "They're witnesses." And just like that, the narrative flipped. Luke, once a man buried in solitude, found himself center of something bigger than a rescue. Arrow's growl was no longer misunderstood. It was evidence, and the hunt for Carl Venshaw had just begun. The first sign was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that arrives just before something breaks. The lake was frozen at the edges, thin ice spider-webbing along the shoreline. The boathouse sat quiet beneath the weight of cold and fog, its walls creaking as wind knifed off the water. Arrow stood at the door before Luke heard anything. His head tilted, ears forward, body tense. Not alarmed. Alert, Luke stepped out onto the deck, his boots crunching over frost, rifle slung across his back, though he hadn't touched it in weeks. The morning mist rolled thick, but even in the pale light he saw them. 3 figures. Carl Venshaw in the center, grey coat buttoned to the neck, lips pursed like someone about to deliver a sermon. Beside him, 2 men, thick, unshaven, wearing gloves not for the weather but for grip, and behind them 2 pit bulls on thick chains, muzzles off, eyes wild. Luke stepped forward. "You're trespassing," he said, voice flat. Carl didn't stop walking. "They're not yours." "They are now." Carl motioned to the dogs. "Your paperwork doesn't matter. These animals are company property, and you're harboring stolen assets." Arrow growled behind Luke, low, steady, like a storm in the earth. "Arrow," Luke said without turning, "stay with Nyla." But Arrow didn't stay. He moved forward, slow but certain, taking position between Luke and the 2 pits. Carl stopped 10 feet out. "You trained them well, but let's not pretend this is about loyalty. Dogs follow the strongest pack." Luke's jaw tightened. "You have no idea what loyalty is." Carl gave a short laugh. "Oh, I know it. I just never found it profitable." He jerked his chin. One of the handlers yanked the leash loose. The first pit lunged. Arrow met it halfway. The 2 bodies collided with a sound like logs splitting, teeth bared, claws scraping against frozen boards. But Arrow didn't bite first. He blocked, redirected, using momentum and body weight like he'd been taught to subdue, not destroy. Moose barreled forward from the side. The second pit jumped too late. Moose's shoulder crashed into it midair, sending both into the snow-packed grass beside the deck. A scuffle, snarls, but Moose held. Not savage, precise. Inside the boathouse, Nyla stood over her pups, body shaking. Her torn ear flicked at every sound, but her eyes stayed focused on the door. She did not cower. She guarded. Carl stepped forward. "Stand down!" he barked. Arrow let go of the pit's neck. He stepped back, panting, but not blooded. The pit limped, confused, more scared now than hostile. Moose released his grip too. The second pit whined, crawled back toward its handler, tail tucked between its legs. Carl's face twisted. "You think this proves something?" Luke moved closer. "I don't need to prove anything. I just need you to see it." Carl raised his voice. "These dogs were made for aggression. You think this redemption arc changes what they are?" Luke pointed toward the pit bulls, now whimpering behind their handlers. "They didn't attack because they're evil. They attacked because you told them to. That's what you taught them, just like you tried to teach these 3. Carl's hand twitched toward his coat. Arrow stiffened. Luke's voice dropped into a warning. "Don't." For a moment no one moved. Breath plumed in frozen clouds. Arrow's gaze locked on Carl's hand. Then Ava's voice broke through the fog. "I'm filming." She stood behind the edge of the boathouse, camera in hand, eyes unwavering. Carl froze. Ava's voice was calm but loud enough. You just turned this into a legal incident. Carl's mask cracked. His lips curled. He took one last look at Arrow, standing between him and the cabin like a statue carved from war, and stepped back. "This isn't over," he said. Luke nodded once. "No, it's not. But it won't end the way you want." Carl turned, motioned his men. The two pit bulls followed, tails dragging, ears low. As they disappeared into the fog, Moose let out a low chuff, more breath than bark. Luke turned to Arrow. The shepherd sat, ribs rising and falling, eyes still scanning the tree line. "You didn't fight because you had to," Luke said quietly. "You fought because you chose to protect." Arrow didn't move, but his ears twitched once. Inside, Nyla curled back around her pups. Outside, the frost deepened, and under it all, something ancient and solid held firm. Not muscle, not command, but something stronger. Loyalty without condition. Defense without hate. They hadn't just won the fight. They'd revealed the truth behind the noise. The video was only 90 seconds long. It opened with frost on the dockboards, the lake a sheet of dull silver behind it. A faint creak of wood, wind brushing through pines, then the figures came into view. Carl Venshaw, two handlers, and the pit bulls at their sides. The camera wasn't steady, but it didn't need to be. It caught everything. Arrow stepping between Carl and the boathouse, body rigid with focus. Moose charging with the force of a freight train, intercepting the lunging pit mid-air. The scuffle, the growl, the collision of bodies. And then, the restraint. Arrow backing off, not because he was called, but because he chose to. Moose turning away after neutralizing the threat. The caption Ava added was simple. They were trained for war. They chose to protect. Within an hour of posting, the video had 2,000 shares. By nightfall, it had cracked 200,000. By morning, it was everywhere. Veteran forums lit up first. Men and women who had served, who had known dogs like Arrow, flooded the comments. "That's not just instinct, that's loyalty. Reminds me of Kilo Fallujah, 2007. He stood in front of shrapnel for me. I've seen this kind of control. It's not fear, it's memory." Animal rights groups picked it up next, then mainstream media. Cable news looped the clip with voiceover debates, talking heads arguing whether the dogs should remain with Luke. Hashtags trended. Not just dogs. Arrow chose. Let them stay by the third day. A news van rolled down Luke's gravel road. He didn't answer the door, but Ava did. Standing in her patched coat, camera bag over her shoulder, she told the reporter they weren't doing interviews. Then she turned and handed the phone to Luke. "It's the Attorney General's office," she said. Luke blinked. "You're kidding." She shook her head. "They want to talk about Carl." In a quiet government building 4 counties east, Luke sat across from state prosecutors in a room with no windows, a bottle of water sweating on the table. He hadn't worn a suit, just clean jeans and the same field jacket he'd worn the day he bought the dogs. The lead investigator leaned forward. "Mr. Granger, do you know why you're here?" "I have a guess," Luke said. They showed him the documents. Financial records, customs logs, internal memos from Venshaw Tactical that someone inside had leaked after the video went viral, dogs listed by serial number, training notes, injection reports, and at the bottom, a redacted name next to an offshore account. "We believe Mr. Venshaw was using his security company to launder money through illegal breeding and high-stakes dog fighting circuits," the agent explained. "What we didn't have until now was public proof of what these dogs really are." Luke didn't speak, but Arrow, curled beside his chair, raised his head when the folder opened again. The prosecutors took notice. "Does he always do that?" one asked. Luke nodded. "When he recognizes something." The man flipped a page. Arrow's ears pinned forward. Luke leaned in. "That's it." They closed the folder slowly. 3 hours later, Carl Venshaw was in handcuffs. The arrest made the evening news. Not as a lead, but the second headline under winter storm warnings. But for the people watching, the veterans, the handlers, the kids who watched Nyla nurse her pups on Ava's feed, it was the headline that mattered. Back at the boathouse, Luke stood on the dock with Ava beside him. Snow drifted around them like memory. "You ever think you'd be part of this?" she asked. "No," Luke said. "I was trying not to be part of anything." Arrow sat between them, eyes scanning the tree line, posture relaxed but alert. "And now?" she asked. He looked down at Arrow. "I think I was just waiting to follow the right one." Ava turned her camera toward him. "You want to say anything to the people watching?" Luke shook his head, then paused. "Maybe just this," he said, eyes on the shepherd. "They weren't lost. They were sent. And if a dog can come back from what they've seen, maybe the rest of us can too." She nodded, clicked off the camera. In the warmth of the boathouse, Nyla stretched her legs as her pups wriggled in straw. Moose let out a loud, satisfied snore against the floorboards. Outside, the cold wind shifted. But inside, something had changed. Not just in how the town saw them, but in how Luke saw himself. For the first time since the war, he wasn't surviving alone. He was standing with a team again. Understood. Here's Chapter 9, 1 year later, written in natural American English, in the tone and rhythm of Maria Goodavege's style, faithful to all your conditions and structure. Snow clung softly to the roof of the old red barn, and for once, Luke Parker didn't mind the cold. He stood just outside the main paddock of the newly opened Rangers Oath Canine Sanctuary, watching Arrow dart through fresh snowdrifts like a pup half his age, ears sharp, nose up, trailing some invisible thrill. The scars across Arrow's flank had faded, but the story behind them hadn't. They were a quiet badge, one not forged by violence, but by survival. Behind the fence, a group of teenagers from the county's youth program laughed as Moose gently nosed a tennis ball toward a girl in a wheelchair. His gait was slower now, but precise. Moose, once a tactical entry dog in blaring chaos, was now a therapy dog at the Silver Pine Veterans Home 3 days a week. He knew how to find pain, even when no one spoke of it. And Nyla, ever the unexpected mother, had done something no one expected from a dog who came from so much darkness. She raised her pups not with sharp correction, but with patience. Luke remembered watching her in those early weeks, carefully letting them wrestle, letting them lose and win, growl and lick. She didn't teach them to fight. She taught them to choose. The smallest of the litter, a sandy-furred little male with one floppy ear, had already been adopted by a former Marine who lost a leg to an IED. They named him Stitch. The others were being trained slowly, gently. Some would go to search and rescue, some to therapy work, and one, maybe two, would stay on at Ranger's Oath. Not as soldiers, as family. Luke walked inside the main office where the heat hummed low. A framed letter from the Department of Veterans Affairs hung on the wall beside a certificate. In recognition of Sergeant Arrow, for distinguished service, unwavering loyalty, and exceptional conduct under duress. Next to it was a photo. Luke, clean-shaven for the first time in a decade, standing next to Arrow on the steps of the Capitol, the medal glinting on the dog's vest. Luke hadn't smiled in the photo, but Arrow had that look, mouth open, ears up, chest forward. Alive. Ava had filmed the whole thing. Her footage, which started as a school project, had exploded online. After the trial, she'd been offered a spot at NYU's journalism program. Her docuseries, Muzzle and Medal, was already shortlisted for a regional Emmy. But she still sent Luke video clips now and then. Her last message was simple. I tell stories because you and Arrow taught me what truth looks like. Outside, a delivery van rumbled to a stop. Luke stepped out to greet the driver, a lanky guy in his 20s with a bright orange beanie and thick gloves. You Luke Parker? The man asked, holding out a clipboard. Yeah. I got a package here. Says it's from the Pentagon. Luke blinked. You sure? The guy shrugged, nodded toward the box in the back. That's what it says. Pretty heavy. Inside the box was a custom-forged tag in bronze, sealed inside a velvet case. It simply read, Arrow, Soldier, Brother, Home. Luke traced the letters with a finger. Arrow padded over and sat beside him without command. His body pressed close, warm, steady. Outside, the other dogs barked, not out of fear, but in greeting. Luke stood, one hand resting on Arrow's back, the other holding the tag. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man who had been broken and rebuilt. He just felt rooted, not hiding, not running, just standing in a place that made sense. Ranger's Oath wasn't about training dogs for war. It was about honoring the ones who made it home, and the people still learning how. The porch creaked softly under the weight of winter's breath. Pale sunlight filtered through bare branches, dappling the wooden floor with shadows that moved like ghosts. Luke sat on the steps of the cabin, a chipped mug of coffee between his hands, steam curling up into the morning chill. Beside him, Arrow lay still, ears perked, eyes half closed but always watching. He wasn't guarding anymore. Not really. But old habits die hard in warriors. Ava adjusted the camera on her shoulder and stepped forward. She looked older now, not in age, but in presence. She had the calm of someone who had walked through fire and chosen to remember, not run. Her brown journal was filled with notes, dog-eared pages, and a list of names that meant something only to those who knew loss by name. The lens zoomed in, capturing Luke's lined face, the way his fingers curled gently into Arrow's fur without thinking. So, Ava said, her voice quiet, why did you save them all? Luke looked away for a moment. Past the field, where Moose now led mobility drills with one of the sanctuary's new residents, a Belgian Malinois who flinched at sudden noises but followed Moose like a shadow. Past the main house, where Nayla's last pup still tugged on the pant leg of a volunteer learning how to walk with a prosthetic. Past it all, to the tree line, where the wind whispered stories no one had written down. Because sometimes, he finally said, the ones who've seen the worst still choose to protect, and that deserves a second chance. Ava didn't say anything for a while. The camera kept rolling, but the silence between them felt full, not empty. Behind them, the front door opened. A boy, maybe 12, peeked out. His shirt had a fresh paw print smeared across it in mud, and his grin was wide. Mr. Luke! Arrow just herded the whole group into the pen, without even barking. Luke laughed, low and warm. Arrow flicked one ear in acknowledgement but didn't rise. Ava followed Luke's gaze to the old German shepherd. There was grey along his muzzle now. His eyes were cloudy in the corners, but his posture was still proud, a sentinel of memory, a keeper of truth. She turned off the camera. That's the last shot, she said. Luke nodded. You sure you got what you needed? She hesitated, then said, I don't think you ever get everything. Some stories. They stay with you. As she packed up her gear, a breeze moved through the pines, rattling the old wind chime hanging from the porch beam. It was made from a shattered military tag, bent and welded into a star. Luke reached up and touched it just once. You know, he said, not looking at her. When I first brought them home, I thought I was doing it for them. But maybe it was the other way around. Ava glanced at him. Maybe they saved me. She nodded slowly. Later that night, as Ava edited the last scene, she inserted a title screen after the final image of Arrow resting beside Luke. "What's your story with a loyal pet?" Then she uploaded the film to her channel. A week later, it had 2 million views. And counting. If you've ever been saved by a dog, or simply stood a little taller because one stood beside you, leave a comment below. Subscribe to support more real stories of our four-legged heroes. This is German Shepherd, where loyalty never dies.